Use the technology. If you use it in a responsible way, the regulation should protect you in using it that way.
If you're planning on using AI, it's worth a small investment to get an opinion on how you need to do that in the right way.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Margaret Wise, Chief Revenue Officer at Active Prospect, and I'm joined by Michelle Schuster and Rich Kahn, and we'll kick off with a couple of introductions to get started. Michelle, would you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Michelle Schuster. I'm a partner at the law firm of McMurray & Schuster, former Consumer Protection Chief for the Ohio Attorney General's Office, and very happy to be part of your webinar today.
Thanks, Michelle. And Rich.
Rich Kahn, CEO and co-founder of Honora, an ad fraud solution. I've been in the digital marketing space for 31 years.
Well, as you can see, we've got a very experienced panel here today, and we're going to be talking about AI. Michelle and Rich are very experienced in fraud, and by extension of that, we're learning a lot about AI very quickly. It's coming into our worlds at a very accelerated pace, and the timing of our webinar today couldn't be better, coming on the heels of the EU approving the AI Act just yesterday in Parliament. So I'm going to talk for just a second about what that was all about and why that's relevant and timely for us in today's conversation. So if I quote one of the leaders, the Romanian leaders that worked on the Parliament regulation there, Trajos Tudaraș, he said, I'm going to truncate this a little bit, the AI Act nudged the future of AI in a human-centric direction and helps us leverage new discoveries, economic growth, social progress, and unlock human potential. Well, that's a very bold and broad statement, but also in line with the fact that AI is impacting all of us in our day-to-day lives already, more than we even realize. So a few definitions that came out of this act, and I'm going to share a little bit about what that is. And the reason that we think about this being really timely and relevant is what's in this act that passed in the EU is very aligned to what's been proposed in the US around AI regulation. We see the EU often being leading indicator for some of the regulation that we can expect in the United States that we've seen around data privacy and consumer privacy. And this legislation originated as consumer safety legislation. So the government is really thinking about what is the impact on, as we heard in that quote, society, economic growth, human potential. So a few terms that we've learned out of the AI Act is low risk versus high risk as relates to AI. So low risk AI is around, just like it describes, low risk, things like content recommendations, spam filters, versus high risk, which is where AI is used in things like medical devices and critical infrastructure. So think about regulation, low risk AI use tends to be a little more voluntary in nature of what needs to be regulated in information versus high risk that we're looking at being very highly regulated. Then we can take AI and we can break that down into two categories, which will kind of serve our discussion a little bit today. The first one being general purpose AI, which is where we're using AI and things like ChatGPT to do kind of limited fulfillment of tasks. So think about use ChatGPT to answer questions and provide you information, and it's kind of Google on steroids. Versus generative AI, which is really recreating human-like experiences. So these conversational chatbots and image creation that's very lifelike. And so what we see that's being regulated around this is definitely more up and to the right, where we talk about high risk and we talk about generative AI. General purpose and low risk AI is more around providing information that says what's in this model, what data is informing this AI model, and making that publicly available. Where we talk about more generative AI, the regulation burden that we see around this is a much heavier reporting burden on things like what is the risk report, incident reports, cybersecurity reports, and energy usage reporting on those models. So I think what we're going to talk about a little bit more today on the good side and the bad side of AI is falling more on probably the low risk and the generative AI, and where we see that in the lead generation ecosystem, and where we're probably seeing it in some of our business practices. But I want to set the stage of what it looks like in a more robust context, so we understand that we kind of understand where we sit inside this bigger picture of AI, and understanding that some of the things that might be happening in that upper right around generative AI can seep and filter down into some of the experiences that we have, experiences that publishers, advertisers, and consumers have, that we want to be aware of. And so with that, just a little bit of background there. And I want to start out for a second and just ask of the audience who we've got here. If you guys will give me just a quick thumbs up or thumbs down. I've got just 2 questions kicking us off, which is to say, how many of you are using AI today in some form? So you've got that in your tools that you're using on a daily basis, or you like ChatGPT and you're using it as a regular resource. Wow, I'm seeing a couple of thumbs down, but a lot of thumbs up. Wow. I think that just really validates the pace of which we are adopting AI in our lives. Now I've got a second question for you guys, which is to ask, if you're lead buying and selling, how much of you are experiencing fraud in the ecosystem and finding fraud to be a problem in your business? So
that answer is going to depend upon whether they work with Rich or not, I do believe, right, Rich?
I might be setting this up for a great stage for Rich here. Okay, so we got a little bit more mixed up and down. Okay, that's good. All right, so we want to talk, we all think about how AI can really help us be more productive, be more efficient in a lot of ways, but there's also some things out there on the bad side of AI, and there's the proliferation of tools like Fraud GPT, Worm GPT, Dark Bard. And so I wanted to kick us off with a question for Rich and Michelle each today, and you guys can choose which one of you want to take first. But how do you see AI being used for the good, and where do you see it being used for the bad?
Michelle, you want to start?
Well, I'll start, and I might take it even a step back further, because I think as we're looking at this, it's kind of nice to put what the AI issues are into buckets. And what the EU did is really kind of adding a 4th bucket to what I think we're already doing in the United States. It was really nice of them to pass that just for purposes of us being able to talk about that at the webinar today. So we'll have to thank them. But, you know, when we're looking at AI, the areas we're really interested in are kind of the TCPA type issues and the other state laws that also regulate artificial voice as a pre-recorded message. And so, you know, in that bucket, we have to make sure that we have the proper kind of consent before we make those telephone calls, either for marketing or even sometimes for informational calls. Also, I think there's that privacy bucket. What is AI being used for that it would implicate one of the state privacy laws, or maybe a California type law like SIPA that deals with the recording of telephone calls. And then I think that last bucket is those unfair, deceptive acts and practices laws out there that are the consumer protection laws on the federal and state level. Are we representing AI to be a human in a way that might be unfair or deceptive? And so when you kind of look at those buckets and where there's a potential for harm, obviously on the telephone calling and texting front, the kind of indiscriminate using of AI to facilitate calls in a way that wouldn't be legal. On the privacy front, providing our AI platforms with access to information about consumers or businesses that would be private information and that might be protected as sensitive or private information under one of the federal or state laws. And then on the UBAC front, we're really probably talking more about criminal behavior that would be problematic. And that's, you know, like the Joe Biden deep fake calls that happened a few weeks ago in I think New Hampshire primary, or the grandparent scams that we're hearing about from fraudsters stealing or acquiring the voices of grandchildren and then using that to generate AI type calls to say I'm in jail. I need grandma, grandpa you to MoneyGram this to me. So those are the areas that we're seeing just kind of generally in broader society.
So just AI as a total, the best way I can describe AI, and for good and bad, was when I got inside the first Tesla that drove itself. And I let it take control of the car for the first time. The only thing I can describe was it's scary cool, right? Because it's this new technology that you can see 20 years down the road, this is going to be the technology, but you're in it 20 years before it's ready, and you really don't have a lot of control over it. And that's kind of what AI is all about now. So you've got, like regulations are just starting to come out. There's a lot of good uses of AI for, content writing, for finding information, for digging through things, for helping with processes and procedures in companies. Like there's so many useful things that you can use for that information and that side of things. And there's so much more that it can do. Like you talk about the high risk and the low risk styles of it. The bad part is obviously when a new tool comes out, bad actors are going to be bad actors. They're just going to find unique ways of using that technology. Every once in a while, I'll come across a video of a celebrity endorsing a product, and it's not them. So, it's actually a picture of them. But if you look at their mouth, it doesn't line up with the voice, but it's their voice, and it's an AI generated voice endorsing a product to try to get you to buy something that obviously, they're not endorsing. That's one example. But there's, in our side of things, people are using AI to, defraud websites from all different aspects, not just from what we focus on, which is visitor fraud, but all kinds of different types of fraudulent activity out there. So again, you're going to have different sides of the coin. You're going to have good and bad for both of what it can do. The promise of the good stuff, when you sort of talk about the medical side and things and being able to process data faster and learn about situations and uncover things faster, yeah, that's going to be great because it can process so much data at such a speed that humans can't keep up. And we use it all the time to process large amounts of data that it would take a data analyst a decade to go through, and it can do it within an hour. Just the amount of stuff that you can process. There's so much there. And we're only in the infancy. So that's why I say it's scary cool, because we just don't know what's coming down the road.
Definitely. Michelle, I want to talk for a second about maybe some of the things that we see the FCC and FTC making moves around this. And you touched on a couple already related to pre-recorded messages falling under this category. We talk again about like conversational AI, and I saw a really cool demo just the other day that our VP of marketing shared with me of a tool that does that phone call. So it's that kind of version of that chatbot integration, but it's a phone call. And it was, hey man, what's up? I hear what you're saying. It was a sales call. Wasn't it? It was a very interactive kind of sales call that pulled in some competitive analysis information, next steps, discovery, the whole thing. So how do you see the FCC and FTC moves that they're making into trying to keep up with AI coming into our business?
Yeah, we're already seeing those moves that they are making. So, the FTC has been very concerned about the use of deepfakes or any use of AI that could be used to defraud consumers. They're very much a consumer protection agency, so they're coming at this from a consumer protection perspective. They're in the middle of looking at whether they need to revise any of their rules based on AI and how that's affecting the marketplace. So I expect that we'll see something out of the FTC here in the next, probably by the end of the year, beginning of next year, where there will be rule revisions. And I suspect that the areas that they're looking at are whether there should be a required disclosure if AI is being used. Should AI be regulated as a pre-recorded message, which the answer is going to be yes. Are there any other unfair or deceptive acts or practices that AI could make easier for fraudsters to perpetrate. So we'll see that on the FTC side. They'll come at it from a consumer protection angle. We may need disclosures there, and they're going to ask for more enforcement authority around this issue. The FCC also already talking about how they're going to pursue enforcement around AI. If you read the TCPA, it talks about regulating artificial or pre-recorded messages. So it's not really anything that the FCC has to do with this point. We've always considered that AI is an artificial voice, and that as an artificial voice, it would be regulated under the TCPA, require prior express written consent for marketing telephone calls. So we see them moving in that direction. Utah just introduced a bill regarding AI, where if you are using AI, it will require a disclosure at the time of use. And so it'll be interesting to see if other states will follow suit and require that there be some type of disclosure that AI is being used, whether it's for phone calls or in web interactions or even texting platforms. What will that disclosure look like? So I think that's where the agencies are moving. Every agency, it feels like right now, is looking at this. The House has put together, the House of Representatives have put together a bipartisan panel to look at AI and to evaluate what type of effects that can have and whether any additional federal regulation will be required. So it's an area we're going to be paying close attention to because we suspect that it will be moving rapidly.
Do you think that we might see things like opt-in permissions to say I opt into AI messages versus I opt out of AI messages, or I opt out of AI messages but I opt into human messages? Or let's say AI actually improves the experience. Could I opt into AI and opt out of human?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're already seeing it, right? So for telephone calls, it's an opt-in environment. So if you're going to use artificial intelligence to place telephone calls, you're going to have to get consent from your called parties. And so, absolutely, we're already seeing that. The question is, what kind of disclosures will be required? Will the disclosures be so onerous that they really kill any prospects of having a quality conversation with a consumer? And I suspect that we're going to see some states be aggressive and start moving in that direction.
And Rich, how much do you see fraud impacting companies today in terms of how disruptive is it to their businesses, and how difficult is it to try to weed it out and block it?
Can you guys hear me? I just noticed a little glitch in the system.
We can.
Okay, good. As long as you can hear me. So AI has been used in fraud attack and fraud creation probably for the last decade to some extent. So while it's getting more and more popular with ChatGPT, as far as people talking about AI, it's been around for years. And we've been looking at this type of stuff for a long time, identifying all kinds of issues that are happening with these types of attacks. So they're using these AI bots to really make things look real, get past CAPTCHAs, do all the stuff that goes undetected. So they've been doing it for a long time, and again, it's only getting worse. Like you mentioned, FraudGPT is a tool out in the market that people can actually purchase and start building their own bots using AI to build the bots for them. So it's, like I said, it's only going to get worse, and which makes it more difficult to detect whether you're doing it on your own or using a third party. You have to amp up the tools that you're using to detect this kind of stuff, because it looks more and more real. So, and again, if they're successful, the percentage of fraud is going to continue to go up. And that's something that every marketer, everybody that's spending money on digital marketing, whether it's through affiliates, through Google, through Facebook, through whatever channel you're buying your marketing dollars from, it's just going to eat into those margins, and it's going to hurt your overall campaign and your overall ability to grow using marketing dollars.
It's a constant race to stay ahead of it. And we developed CAPTCHA, and now the bots can work around CAPTCHA, and then we'll try to do the next thing and the next thing for sure. Well, we've already got a question in from the audience. So thank you to who submitted this. And it's, what is the biggest precaution companies should take when implementing AI for the first time?
So I think it depends what business you're in.
Rich, could you go on mute maybe when you're not speaking? I think you might be giving Michelle a little feedback.
Sure. Hold on one sec.
Thanks.
Oh, I always like Rich's feedback. On a webinar. When it depends on the business. And so, one of the things that we would recommend that companies look at first is, do you have sensitive or private information that would be used to feed an AI source in order for, that would be publicly available? So for instance, ChatGPT is a publicly shared well of information. And so if that's something that you're using and putting sensitive or private business communications into in order to get a response, so you're putting it in as a query, then that's something that could be very problematic. It could implicate data breach laws. So just really understand that if you are using an AI, especially a generative AI system, what's going on with the data that you're inputting in a query. And businesses should have policies and procedures around this as to what type of AI their employees can use, and put guardrails up around that, especially around that type of unprotected information. Also, I would say that, we're seeing a lot of AI tools. It feels like every phone call I'm on with an organization has an AI bot that is recording that telephone call. There are states, California being the most notorious of them, that have requirements that if you are recording conversations, that consent be provided before you can do that. And so if you're using AI tools to record conversations with your potential customers, or even in business settings, it can certainly lead to claims of unlawful recording or monitoring. And in California, that's $5,000 a call. So, or $5,000 a communication. So really important to pay attention to those types of things.
That's a great point. I think most of us are using some type of note-taking or recording functionality now. Is it acceptable when it says, this call is being recorded? Is it implied consent if somebody just stays in the call after that announcement's been made? Or does there need to be something more specific and overt?
Yeah, it can be. And you find on a lot of those platforms, especially the ones that, we're involved with on various calls throughout the day, that they ask that the participants that are on that recorded call acknowledge that they're being recorded and agree to stay on the call. So there are certainly ways that you can build in mechanisms and safeguards to prevent, an unintentional violation of those regulations. Home Depot was recently hit with a lawsuit around the use of AI for monitoring and recording their customer service calls, and without giving that consent to record disclosure. So lots of different ways that this could come up and affect companies.
That's a great point. And that actually leads me into another question that I had for both of you, which is, do you see that small businesses are impacted differently than large businesses?
I can jump there. Looking at the different companies that we work with, the smaller businesses have less technical resources at hand. So they're getting to play with technology, but they really don't get to delve into a lot of it. They just don't have the resources to do it. Where the bigger companies can take advantage of that and do a lot more stuff with AI faster, just simply for that, they just have the resource and the workload to be able to do that. As far as the technology being available to everybody, it's available to everybody. It's just who's got the time to learn a whole nother thing that's coming out that's constantly changing. It's one of those things you just got to stay on top of.
Do you think, Rich, from a technology perspective, do you see this something that, like Michelle was talking about having guidelines in your business, do you see this something that goes in a cybersecurity handbook for the company, or something that goes in the employee handbook for the company, or is it kind of its own separate policies and guidelines?
I could probably go either, but probably putting a separate section for AI on how it works, because I know there's some companies, some people that I've spoken to have separate policies on that. Kind of like you have some companies have a non-compete that's separate from everything. Some people have a computer use policy, separate from everything. This probably is going to grow over time as far as how the policy grows. So it might make sense to have that as a separate policy, just so that it's specific. Like if you look at employee handbooks now, they're getting thick, right? You don't want to get lost in the mix. So having a separate policy for that, depending on the length of it, makes sense to have its own separate policy for it, in my opinion.
Yeah. And Michelle, how are you advising companies around this, or have you gotten this question yet?
Well, we're assisting companies already with putting together these policies and procedures. And, I hate to give this answer, but it really does depend, right? It depends on the size and the sophistication of the business. It may be that a one size fits all type of policy and procedure that covers every potential use of AI would accomplish what you need to accomplish. But it may be that, there are certain things that your IP group needs to understand differently from your customer service group. And so it's really something that you need to take a look at and integrate into the operations anywhere that AI is integrated. So I would take the approach of first looking to see where you are or where you want to start using AI, and then determine what type of guardrails you need to put around that use. And that's from, I would say, obviously from a legal perspective, from an IP perspective, from an IT perspective, lots of different considerations around these policies and procedures. So I think the sooner you get a handle on them, the better. We are at the infancy, there we go, of the technology. And so I think it's good to get in front of it before it does become so commonplace that maybe we forget a little bit about how it can be problematic in certain situations.
Yeah. When we're thinking about the risk assessment associated with this, I know a lot of the TCPA threat/protection is the private right of action threat in litigation. When we talk about AI, and this is for both of you, do you see that being more as being driven by government and government regulation and government addressing that, or do you see this opened up to private right of action as well?
Rich, do you want to start?
I'm going to pass it on to you because we're
okay. All right. The answer is both. Really, it is. It's a popular issue. It's a sexy issue, and politicians, they have to run for office every set number of years, and so if they can get their name associated with something that's going to catch the general public's attention, like artificial intelligence, it's something that everybody is curious about right now, then they're going to want to get involved in sponsoring legislation around that, or being involved in one of these bipartisan committees that are being set up. So I think that we are definitely going to see regulations. We're already seeing it that are being drafted and introduced. But that's not going to slow down the wave of litigation for statutes and regulations like the TCPA that have a private right of action, because there is such an active plaintiffs bar out there right now in this area that they are always looking for new theories to initiate litigation. And so the regulators will be very happy that continues, but it's not going to slow them down from getting headlines around new rules, enforcement, new laws, new statutes. It's all going to happen kind of at the speed that AI is happening. It feels like, it's evolving so quickly. And I feel like the regulatory landscape, while it's behind as usual, it's working to catch up very quickly.
Yeah. Well, don't want to, the webinar today is definitely not about creating a bunch of fear related to AI, but I think it is good to be aware that it's kind of, there's a lot of attention on this on all fronts.
Yeah, it's simple is what I would say. We don't want to create fear. We want to create awareness so that they can address it proactively, have a defendable position, and be able to sleep easy at night. I agree 100% with you, Margaret.
Yep. Rich, I got a great question for you and from the audience. Is there potential for AI to be implemented to auto-detect possible revocation language to expedite the opt-out process and keep up with the FCC's latest requirements?
Yes, it can evolve to anything. I always say you can do anything in code. AI is code, right? So if you can think it, you can make it happen. So being able to keep that, have it auto-detect different stuff like that, it's not hard at all. That's stuff that could pretty much be done today, as long as the person behind the developing of it is keeping up with the latest law trends and everything else. So this is where it gets interesting, is that, AI can do anything you can dream up, and there are some people out there that are doing good stuff with it, and there's some people out there going to do some bad stuff with it. So it's just part of the technology. Look at all kinds of stuff. Automobiles can be used for good. They can also be used for bad. It doesn't mean the technology is bad. It just means bad actors are bad actors, no matter what technology or what type of stuff you give them and put in their hands.
I think it's a great question because we can use AI to stay ahead of AI. And the question about right now, we know that the opt-out language, the revocation language is constantly evolving, and the time frame of which you have to respond and enforce that inside your systems is getting shorter, and there's more terms that are being considered as indicative of revocation. So using AI to constantly stay ahead of that is a great strategy. I want to see if there's some more questions coming in from the audience here. We'll give it just a second. I know we've covered a lot of ground already, so I'll stop for a second and see if we have any audience questions.
While you're looking for questions, I might just add, because it's a nice segue into the topic, is that Microsoft has proposed to become involved with the carriers, the telecom carriers, to allow their AI system to monitor telephone calls so that they can detect illegal calls and allow them to act more quickly to stop those calls, so to block those calls. But I don't know, it's kind of like the fox guarding the hen house, right? I mean, it used to be we had a right to privacy around these types of things, and you could have a telephone call without feeling like or knowing that it would be monitored. And so, I credit Microsoft for being in a mode where they're trying to be proactive so that their AI solutions don't get so overly regulated. They want to become the regulators' friends up front, but it really is a scary proposition, depending upon how AI will be used as a compliance or a regulatory tool.
Like you said, there goes privacy out the window.
Right.
It's such an interesting one because when you think about just layering this up into consumer experience and value exchange, and you think I'm much more on the side of privacy and preserving my privacy, but on the other hand, I get so much value out of the Delta app and using Waze that I gladly give up a lot of privacy about where I'm going, how I'm getting there, when I'm getting there, where I am in the airport, where I am in my journey, because I get value out of that. So this is interesting for Microsoft because there's a ton of value and the data that they will pull in and use for AI. And if they're giving enough value back to the consumer in the prevention of unwanted calls and blocking all of that, then they may get a lot of opt-in for that. And I think the question will be, how easy and transparent is it for you to participate or opt out of that?
Yeah. Or is this buried in your user agreements that we don't really see? And it's something that we will have to monitor very carefully and object when it gets to the obscene, which it has the ability to do.
Yes.
If they're listening to your calls, listening to your video conferences, and then using that information for other purposes because it's available, and do you trust somebody to be able to use that information just to protect you?
Yeah.
That becomes that big question. So like you said, if you're using a Waze app or something, okay, you're giving up some of your privacy and you're willingly, and you're doing it. But if you're having a conversation with another, colleague at the office and talking about this new product you're going to roll out, and that information is getting leaked off that call, that's when you're not going to be too happy with it. So
you talk about health conversations, right?
Yeah.
Attorney-client privilege or, sensitive political calls. I mean, it's just.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think all these we're talking about in the context of Microsoft, but we're talking about all these pre-recorded calls, right? It's, it's something to think about, whether it's an internal business meeting or with a partner that's being recorded, or whether it's an outbound call center call. So we had another question in. This one was back for you, Michelle. Was just asking if you talked about the 3 buckets of fraud issues. Thinking about AI at the beginning, wanted to see if you could repeat those 3, or if there's a place that somebody could go to and see that.
So I was just breaking it up into what I think are the areas to look at. And so, the areas where this is being regulated right now are, and I would just bucket this one, the TCPA bucket. But there are other laws that have the same requirements as the TCPA. They could get consent for artificial or pre-recorded messages. And I would say even for those regulations that don't specifically mention artificial, I think that those statutes are going to be enforced with anything that's labeled as pre-recorded, that an artificial, an AI call will fit into that. And then the second is privacy. And so, we've talked about several situations where AI can be used to monitor information, the call recordings that we're talking about. But then also, just as you're working with AI tools and the information that you're submitting into the AI query, that then if you're not careful, and if you are using some of the publicly available tools like ChatGPT, then that's put back into the system as part of its bucket of information that it can learn from. And so are you unwittingly putting information into an AI system that should be protected, that maybe has a legal requirement to be protected, that you're violating by using it in those types of queries? And then the last bucket that we were talking about was just UDAP, and that's unfair, deceptive acts and practices. It's the fundamental basis of all consumer protection laws in the United States that it prohibits unfair or deceptive acts or practices. And so a lot of the regulators we're hearing talk about now how the use of an AI voice to impersonate a human voice, whether in the deep fake type of setting or just in a customer service setting, where it's not obvious to the consumer that they're talking to an artificial intelligence machine. Is that an unfair or deceptive act or practice because you're claiming that it's a human voice or maybe presenting it as a human voice when it is not? And so that's another area where we're seeing these regulations evolve. So for me, it's just easy as I'm looking at what is important from a compliance perspective to look at those buckets.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Rich, another question for you, something that's come in from the audience here. Is there a risk that AI could be heavily regulated in the near future? And I think first I would say to the person questioning, like, near future, do you mean a year? Do you mean 5 years? So, thinking about that. But the comment here and the question for you, Rich, is this could portend lead gen businesses to be hesitant to install something just for it to be outlawed. And that's a great point. We know a lot in the lead gen business right now are saying, well, I'm going to maybe roll back automated technology as a way to avoid some of the risk here. So, do you think companies should just not roll out AI or invest in AI because it's going to be so hard to be compliant with the regulation? Or how do you think they should proceed?
Let's AI, as far as being heavily regulated in the near future, again, whether that's 5 years from now, 10 years from now, yeah, it's going to be regulated because it's a technology that can be used for good and bad. So there's got to be regulations coming out to protect consumers. Should lead gen business not use the technology? No, use the technology. If you use it in a responsible way, the regulation should protect you in using it that way. However, if you're using it irresponsibly, and those that do, who you are, then you're going to get the regulations are going to come down on you, because the whole idea is this is a new technology that as a society we want to embrace, but use it responsibly like everything else.
Yeah, that's great advice. We got a few more questions flowing in, so I'll see which of you would like to take this one. Let's see here. Let me go back, see if I can get these in order. All right. Will AI voice or text sequences be acceptable to use under the new one-to-one consent laws that will be coming into effect soon? That into effect soon being January 26th of 2025. Is there any idea of a specific way that you will need to register your AI to qualify as it being part of the party you are telling your leads will be reaching out to them? Oh, that's interesting. So in a one-to-one consent, is the party actually AI in that being identified as the entity?
Yeah, I guess what they're trying to say there is to prevent that UDAP, that unfair deceptive act as practice. Mm-hmm. argument that if you are disclosing in the consent form that you are going to be contacted by AI, you get around that, or comply with that, not get around, you comply with that. Or if you are using artificial voice and you're using it primarily for marketing purposes, but if you're using it for marketing purposes, getting the consent that's required. So putting in that in the consent language is obviously critical, and we've been doing that for years. So, I could see there, obviously there's benefits to doing that in the lead forms, but like with everything, just make sure that whatever you're doing, you're covering in that language. And I do think that if you are getting consent anyway, getting consent to use a pre-recorded or artificial voice is something you should just do as a best practice.
Yeah, just make it part of it.
Yeah.
Here's another one. So this is a kind of a follow-on question. If you are using AI to transcribe calls, does it need to be disclosed? And I'm guessing the nuance here is it's not actively recording the call live, but it's transcribing, which I think you have to record to transcribe. So I think that would be yes, but I'll see if you would say anything different.
So just to know the laws that we're talking about here, there are wiretapping laws in the United States. And so with those wiretap laws, the requirements are on the basic level that at least one person to that telephone call understand that it is being monitored or recorded. And so monitoring, I think, is the equivalent to the question or the scenario that's presented in that question where it's being monitored and then transcribed. But so on the federal level, if you have consent of one party, you're going to meet that requirement. And in most states, but there are, I think it's 13 states, don't hold me to that, but it's very close. It's somewhere between 10 and 15 that require the consent of all parties to record or to monitor that telephone call. And some of those come with the potential for private rights of action and damages. And so, I definitely do believe that the transcribing of those calls is going to fit under those eavesdropping laws, because in order to transcribe it, you have to record it or monitor it in some way. And that's what those regulations cover.
Mm-hmm. Michelle, just a quick follow-up question to that on that.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, whether you're in Zoom or some of these other chat sessions, a lot of the AI, transcribing functions pop up on your screen and indicate that that's happening. Yeah. Is that enough, or do you have to actually physically get someone to consent by pressing a button to allow that to happen?
Yeah, obviously get legal advice, get your specific situation, ask your attorney. We're not providing legal advice here, but yeah, Rich, I think that would be sufficient, because that disclosure about consent or recording, it's definitely going to be covered under that. And I think in most of those regulations that consent is implied once you've been provided notice and you don't disconnect from the call. I will also say in those regulations, just to kind of take some of the fear away, a lot of them do have exceptions for the recording in the ordinary course of business, or some other exceptions to the requirements that might apply to you. So if you're planning on using AI to monitor, transcribe, record telephone calls, then it's worth the small investment to get an opinion on how you need to do that in the right way.
Sure.
Yeah. I think Michelle, last time you and I were talking together on this, the ounce of prevention was a good, good phrase to keep in mind, really across the board. All right. Another question, I'll take this one, was how can we use AI to help with the new FCC regulation in regards to trusted form? I think it's maybe a little bit of the inverse of that, of trusted form helps you with the FCC regulation. And so trusted form is an active prospect product, and it does help. Obviously, it's if you put trusted form in there, you probably are familiar with trusted form, which provides that independent proof of the lead capture event. So in that capture shows that consent was captured. We have, as part of our trusted form offering, we have Verify, which helps you look at that consent language to ensure with the FCC regulation that it was one-to-one. You can use that to manage your consent language variations. And so you may choose to use AI in a few ways. You might use AI to manage your consent language and your consent language variations across brands. If you're using Trusted Form, you can use Trusted Form Insights. And then we have some of our more sophisticated customers taking insights and running some AI against that just for insights into their lead performance. So that's not necessarily FCC regulation, but there are a number of ways that you can do that. Our team would be happy to chat with you a little bit more about that as well. And then we have another, we had a question. Here we go. This was a very philosophical question. And if you've been following any of the OpenAI public discourse, this is where my mind immediately went to with this question. Do you feel an important good would be to open source the closed AI platforms? Meaning, should the training data be available to understand potential bias? And I think this is a little bit of where the AI Act, EU regulation is headed, where they're saying any AI being used, even if it's in that low risk, even if it's in that general purpose AI, has to make public the data that they are training their model on. So in terms of just answering that in a pure regulatory sense, I think the answer is yes, that's absolutely the case. And then Richard, Michelle, I don't know if you would add anything onto that in terms of opining whether that's good or just an objective way to treat it.
That's such an interesting question that I would love to discuss for a very long time over a bourbon.
I was like, this should be our next webinar.
But, this is something that's already in the news. We're already talking about this. And that is that the way AI is learning, that there can be bias built into that, whether it's gender or racial or age or whatever, that, biases can be built in because AI is learning from the information that it's being presented. So if information is being presented to AI that in and of itself was generated with that bias, then that bias bleeds into AI. And so I don't have a good answer for this. It makes my head hurt to think about controlling all of the things that go into AI. Maybe, Rich, that's something that you could address. But
not just the content, though, because if you talk about some of the stuff that happened with Google's AI, and it wasn't about the data going in, it was around the content regulators.
Yeah.
And so, how do you reveal that? Because those are the algorithms, and that potentially is competitive differentiation for companies with their AI learning. And so it's a really interesting question.
Yeah. So if you're looking at it from that standpoint, you've got two parts of the AI platform, right? You've got the algorithm that runs the AI itself, and then you got the data that's fed into it. And I think based on this question, they're wondering if it's good to open source the actual platform, the algorithm, which is kind of going to be those companies' secret sauce. So I know those companies that are putting this out are going to fight against that, because if they give out, here's how we do it, and now you feed with your own data, it kind of invalidates what they're doing. That's a good point. I've always been a fan of open source, being a developer for so many years, but whether that's a good idea with AI, I don't know. That is a definitely interesting question that requires a glass of bourbon, right? Because there's so many aspects to that. I get the data being fed into it. There's a lot of information to it, but it's how that data is treated once it gets inside the AI algorithms.
Yeah. Speaking of having lots of long discussion over a glass of bourbon on some of these fun topics, I'll do a quick audience poll. Who in the audience is going to LeadsCon? I'm going. Give it a thumbs up. Michelle's going. Rich, you going to LeadsCon?
Yes, I am.
All right. So all thumbs up from the screen here. Oh, lots of thumbs up. So find any of us. I think we'd all be willing to be wrestled down to a bar and talk about this more. All right. A few more questions coming in. Do we have links to any materials that we can use to look into the issues discussed further?
I can provide some links.
Michelle, do you guys want to point to your websites or your LinkedIn or any place else to share more information?
Sure. So our website, mslawgroup.com, we are blogging regularly putting out articles on these topics and others. So mslawgroup.com, I would recommend that. Also, I'm happy to provide links to some of the information we provided, Margaret, if you want to provide that with the video.
Follow-ups, yeah.
And same on our site, Anora.io. We have a blog section posting typically once a week, updated articles on all kinds of topics, typically around fraud and what's happening. And we have some articles in there about AI and fraud. You can just do a quick search for AI and it'll bring up a bunch of articles.
Yeah, and Rich, thank you for that. Because and to Michelle, both of you, Rich, I have followed your blog and articles on this for quite a while, and so was excited to have you a guest on this. And Michelle, I know that you are in the thick of this day in, day out with your clients and providing legal and advisory services on the topic. So thank you for participating. For Active Prospect on our website, we also have on our site blog section where we have lots of content around this, as well as our full FCC series webinars. Also following us on LinkedIn, providing lots of great content there as well. So looks like we are finished with questions. So thank you so much for participating, and thank you to the audience. And definitely reach out to any of us on LinkedIn or emails, and would love to see everyone at LeadsCon or over LinkedIn or email. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret.